Today's sponsor is NetRef. Stay tuned at the end of the show to learn more about a free webinar sponsored by NetRef that I'll be hosting. 5 ways to help teachers progress in their use of technology. Advice from a filmmaking professional about how to help kids make movies. Episode 462.
The 10-Minute Teacher Podcast with Vicki Davis. Every weekday, you'll learn powerful, practical ways to be a more remarkable teacher today.
Today, we're talking with Stephen Hullfish, author of Art of the Cut, and he is a professional film editor and has met with my students today here at Sherwood Christian Academy to talk to them about editing. Steve, I know that you've worked with kids and adults in various places around the world. What's your advice to those who are beginning to tell digital stories?
One of my main pieces of advice is to let the kids know that they shouldn't be too hard on themselves about the quality of their first projects. We've all watched so much good television or quality entertainment. And when you see your first efforts of trying to mimic that, they're always a disappointment. And so often, I think for young people, it's easy for them to give up when they see that what their expectations are for their own work isn't there, that they're not living up to their own expectations. They just really have to be given room to fail. And also the understanding that it's like any musical instrument. Like if you're talking to kids, you've got your art kids and you got your sporty kids, right? So it's really easy to tell the artists, look, the first time you picked up a violin, like, did it sound fantastic? No, it sounded awful. The first time you played piano, it sounded plunky. The first time you threw a baseball or tried to tackle somebody, you failed, and you fail and you fail. And you got to know that in sports and in music or dance or something, those kids know at an early age. I wasn't very good when I started dance class, and I wasn't very good when I started music, and I wasn't very good when I started ice skating or whatever it was. They understand the value of practice, and television and film and learning television and film and even storytelling, even just somebody that writes a story, they have to understand that that takes just the same amount of practice that any other art or any other sport does. And a lot of kids don't get that. And you just have to say, hey, your first project's not going to be great, but neither was your first dance and neither was your first baseball hit. You struck out.
Yeah. As I tell them, anything worth doing well is worth doing poorly at first. You have to start somewhere, but you got to start. Now, you and I were texting the other day, and you said something fascinating to me about pre-shooting. Help me understand, what do you mean by pre-shooting?
Well, it's a little bit more complicated for the professionals at my level. But even for a high school student or a grade school student, if they're going to do a project, like I know your students were just talking about doing a narrative film today, and they're going to shoot something. If they have a project that's due over, let's say, a week or 2 weeks before they have the final due, think how great it would be if this weekend or tonight they shot quickly first on their iPhones or some simple camera, even if it was multiple locations and they shot the whole thing in a living room. What if they shot that first and edited it together and they're like, oh man, I see the problems. Oh, wouldn't it be more interesting if this person walked in like this? And maybe the blocking was so boring when it's just the 3 people standing facing the camera. That's terrible. Like, what can I do when I have the real equipment and I have the real actors and I have the real pressures? Let's figure all those things out before, when there's no pressure, quickly and simply, so that when the pressure comes and I'm working with the real equipment and we've got the real lights and the real actors, then at least I have an idea. And it's almost like writing an outline for an essay. You don't just go right into writing the essay. You go, oh, here are my thoughts. I think the first paragraph should be this and this and this. You write the outline. The pre-shooting is kind of like an outline.
So here's the struggle. When I teach kids how to make movies, they don't want to write a script, but you can usually get that out of them. But they don't want to storyboard. Does pre-shooting replace any of that, or is it in addition to those things?
Not everybody does storyboarding. I can understand why you want them to storyboard as an instructor and as a teacher. I understand the value of that as an educational device, but not everybody uses it as a true creative device. Not all filmmakers do that. I think it does kind of replace storyboarding because it allows you to say, well, I don't know how I would draw the characters in this scene, they were standing in a location and I had a camera. I could kind of move the camera around and I could ask them to move around. And it's easier for me to do that than to draw it. So I think it would kind of replace storyboarding.
So film is a rapidly growing industry in many places in the state of Georgia, in many places. And, you've kind of grown up in the business, taught yourself a lot, but think about kids today, kids that are going to end up in the film industry. What kind of things do you think they need to be learning in high school so they could be successful in film?
I really think they just need to get as much experience and try as many projects as they possibly can. I just saw a great tweet from Ava DuVernay, who did A Wrinkle in Time. And she said, people think all the time that I spent before I made my first feature film was wasted. She said, absolutely not. That's the time when nobody's looking at you and you can afford to fail and you can afford to experiment and you can afford to try things, because once you've got a $100 million budget that's on your shoulders, you can't afford to do any of those things. You are very much constricted by the need to have success. But when they're in high school, they don't have to have success. They want success, but they don't have to have it. So that's a great time to fail, and just constantly be letting them know that by making mistakes and by failing, they're learning.
We've got this huge network now called YouTube. So do you think that the techniques used in Hollywood where you typically work versus those used in YouTube, is there any overlap, or is that an entirely different film genre, you think?
I think there's overlap to it. I had a friend that did a project on YouTube, and I kind of criticized him for the blocking that he used in the way that the camera was positioned. And he goes, this is what people are used to on YouTube. He goes, I understand that the framing wasn't great and that the positioning of the characters weren't great, but this is what people expect from that media. And so that's why I did it the way I did it. So he was cognizant of the differences between Netflix and YouTube, or Universal Studios and YouTube.
Now, I asked you that in my earlier class, but I'm going to ask you for the podcast. If you could go back and talk to yourself when you were in high school, what would you say to yourself to prepare you for the kind of industry you're in now, which is the film business?
Yeah, I have to go back to the same answer I gave a few minutes ago, which was that you need practice. You have to put in the hours of finding something to edit and edit again. And if you're a director or a cinematographer, you have to make images. You have to go out with a camera and go, okay, it's, Tuesday afternoon. I could play video games all day, or I could knock out my homework as quickly as I can. And instead of going on social media, I could go out with my camera and shoot something. That's what you need to do. You need to shoot something. And if you're an editor, you need to shoot something so you have something to edit.
And, my students were grinning, actually. One of them went and told their mom in the hall, he likes to make films and he's been doing it since he was in second grade. And he's like, Mom, see, all that time wasn't wasted.
It absolutely was not wasted. And I tell you, honestly, if that kid does not go into the film industry, if he becomes an engineer, if he becomes a doctor, if he becomes a lawyer, that time is still not wasted, because he learned to complete a project. He learned to tell a story. He learned to communicate with other human beings. And that is going to serve him well no matter what he does.
So the name of the book is Art of the Cut. And you've interviewed how many editors?
I have interviewed, at this point, more than 200 editors, almost every Oscar-winning editor for the last 30 years. I'd say 80% of the top grossing films in the world I've interviewed the editors for. But the book itself, I'd interviewed 50 editors at that point that I published the book. And just to make sure, because there's two books that are very similarly named, my book is Art of the Cut, Conversations with Film and TV Editors. So it's an orange cover and not a gray cover. There's another book called The Art of the Cut, and that is somebody else's book.
So all these other interviews, what you're learning from those, where can people access those resources?
That's on a website called provideocoalition.com. And it's actually a great website, not just for my own writings, but Pro Video Coalition is a coalition of gurus. There are people that actually work in the industry that are willing to talk. And the articles that you read on there about filmmaking and cameras and editing and After Effects and graphics and creativity in general, all those people are guru level people that I respect and appreciate their writing. So you can also on that website see all their writing, but my writing is mostly about editing and is mostly these interviews, which I publish about once a week.
Awesome. So Art of the Cut by Stephen Hullfish. We'll have all of his bio and resources in our show notes. Thanks, Steve.
You're very welcome. It was great talking to you.
NetRef is sponsoring this month's free webinar. On Tuesday, March 26th at 4 p.m., I'll be sharing 5 ways to help teachers progress in their use of technology. These are 5 simple methods to help teachers level up in their ability to use classroom technology. If you're a teacher, administrator, or an instructional technology director, you'll get something out of this webinar. Go to coolcatteacher.com/netref to register. And stay tuned to learn more about NetRef and their powerful internet monitoring and reporting tool for schools.
Thank you for listening to the 10-Minute Teacher Podcast. You can download the show notes and see the archive at coolcatteacher.com/podcast. Never stop learning.